My name is Tandazani Dhlakama, and I've been in Cape Town since December 2017. I'm an assistant curator at Zeitz MOCCA. Before I was at Zeitz MOCCA, I worked at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe for about 5 years, and in between I took a break to do an internship and to do my master's at Leeds University. I've always been interested in art. I mean, I think my earliest memory of engaging with a museum, an art space, or with art is entering Eisteddfod competitions in primary school and going to the National Gallery to look at my art with a school group or with my parents. I just have these memories of sitting on the floor, on the wooden tiles of the National Gallery of Zimbabwe and sketching, just with these big wooden boards and just sketching, looking at the material culture exhibitions, particularly these large vessels and pots. And we loved it. We loved those types of school excursions that would take place once or twice a year. So art, in one way or another, has always been part of my life. And I'm very privileged to have had that. I'm very interested in artists who are talking about pertinent, urgent topics, artists that are forcing us to reflect on who we are, helping us to find articulation for things that, for whatever reason, we cannot articulate. And that's very broad, and it looks different all the time. But I'm interested in artists who are talking about the future, giving us an imagination for the future, also helping us to unpack the complex, entangled narratives that we find ourselves in today.
For me personally, it's really difficult to separate art and politics or art and justice. When I started at Zeitz MOCCA, I actually started off working in the Center for Art Education and absolutely loved that, working with hundreds of teenagers. We were partnering with Lalela, an after-schools program that helps to engage young people from the inner city ball here in Cape Town. In a similar way, I was curator for art education at the National Gallery in Zimbabwe, where there was an art school, and we did similar museum programming. And I think because of that background, I'm always thinking about how do we break those barriers, whether it's psychological barriers or physical barriers. Whether I'm working in Harare or Cape Town, there are communities, there are people that can't afford the $1 in Zimbabwe or however much rand it is to come to an art institution or go to an art opening or engage with art and culture. I have the privilege also right now to work with artists or know artists that are dealing with issues that are relevant to society, that are dealing with issues around justice, migration, race, and politics or restitution or repatriation. And those are topics and issues that relate to a lot of people, and I even want to say issues that relate to all of us in one way or another. And for me, those issues are amplified beyond the museum walls. And that's why I know that what I'm doing is important. Fife Bob Painting at the End of an Era was a group exhibition featuring 29 artists from Zimbabwe. And when I say from Zimbabwe, I mean either were born there or have some sort of affiliation with Zimbabwe. And it came about at a time when the longest standing president at that time, Robert Mugabe, had just been forced to resign. And it was a really interesting and tense time for Zimbabwe. There was a lot of political uncertainty. There was great excitement. but also trepidation. At the same time, all of this was happening with a really fragile economic backdrop. So nobody really knew what to expect or what was going to happen. One of the best ways to try and find a way of articulating that really important moment or this transition from one era to the next was to talk to the artists, see what the artists were doing. And so we decided to focus on painting because there is extensive research, there's extensive documentation on the Zimbabwean contemporary stone sculpture movement or the modern sculpture movement, but very little is known on painting. And it was titled Fife Bob because at that time the average taxi fare was 50 cents. And a bob is like a slang for 50 cents. And the taxi was a metaphor to talk about the artist or the nation being passengers in a taxi that's about to start, and you don't know whether it's going to go left or right, or if it's going to break down or speed away. So that was the premise of the show. It was very important to partner and collaborate with other institutions. Zeitz MOCCA worked very closely with the National Gallery of Zimbabwe and other important art spaces such as Gallery Delta in Zimbabwe, where there were some key individuals who had contributed immensely to the contemporary art scene there. We invited 3 artists, Mishek Masamvu, Richard Mudariki, and Kufa Makwarara, to come and occupy the museum for a month, and we basically turned part of level 3 in Zeitz MOCCA into a painting studio, and it was fantastic. Some of the most interesting conversations were had, and that was some of the work that was central to the Fife Bob exhibition. I've really enjoyed working at Zeitz MOCCA because I've been able to see and be part of some really interesting, important shows. For example, the Nobuko Gaba show was quite experimental, and she basically covered an entire room with what some people call China bags, to talk about the xenophobic undertones associated with that bag. And recently, after 7 months of lockdown, the Zeitz MOCCA Museum reopened with an exhibition titled Home is Where the Art Is. And so it was an exhibition where we invited all Cape Townians, anyone living in Cape Town, to come with one artwork. It could be something they owned, something they created, something that they inherited. And the whole idea was we wanted them to see Zeitz MOCCA as a home. But at the same time, in 2020, a lot of people spent a lot of time at home, and for many people it was the kindest thing you could do was to stay home in order to protect everyone else around you and to protect yourself. So we were also interested to find out, what was it? Was there a specific painting that kept you going, or did you make art as a form of therapy? Was the museum collaborating with local residents? It involved us collaborating with art centers around the Cape Town metropolis. It involved collaboration interdepartmentally. Almost 1,600 people responded, just over 2,000 works, and we had to hang everything salon style because the result was overwhelmingly positive, and it was something that was really touching for us as a team here at Zeitz MOCCA. I think it's very important for museums like ourselves, especially new museums, to know that everything we're doing is part of a continuum, and it's very important to acknowledge those who came before us, who laid this very important groundwork. We're constantly thinking about institutional humility and knowing that even though we take up lots of space, we are literally, there are other people who laid the foundations for us. For me, it's all about an ecosystem, and the most important people, like my director always says, Koyokuo, is the artist, and that's something that I'm constantly acknowledging and trying to remind myself. Has there been a time when I felt like my work was misunderstood? There have been a couple of times. I, at some point, used to make work. I unfortunately don't have time to make work anymore. But the last exhibition I had in 2014, it was just a body of work looking at my family totem. Mutupo means totem in Shona, and it's a monkey. And I was using a monkey to talk about family conflict, things that are passed down through the bloodline. And so I titled it Disowning My Mutupo, as a way of ridding myself of negative things within the family. A couple of people said to me, I'm not coming to your exhibition and I'm not interested, because as a Shona person, as a Zimbabwean, you should be proud of your Mutupo. And so they read it as if I am kind of like bowing to the colonizer by disowning my Mutupo, but actually I was using the symbol of a monkey to reject some of the negative things within my family. Another time where I felt like my work was misunderstood. So I had the great privilege of co-curating an exhibition at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe with a friend and former colleague of mine, Zeitz MOCCA. And we were tasked to curate the annual women's exhibition. And now you may ask, okay, why is there a standalone slot called the annual women's exhibition? It was a way of trying to rectify the fact that women were not visible within the arts in Zimbabwe and in many other parts of the world. So what Zeitz and I said was that we don't want this to be the usual tokenist women's show. The show was titled Discolored Margins, where we were talking about race, identity, feminism, and other important issues. It wasn't obvious that this was the annual women's exhibition. So what we decided was that we were going to utilize the space more sparingly, also mixing it up so that it wasn't only local artists. It was a way of questioning that space and questioning this idea of having a token space or a token schedule. But in terms of misunderstanding, I suppose some of the artists who were used to being part of that exhibition year after year after year were upset with us. But I think it's important for institutions to switch things up. And I'd rather curate a show that has impact, where we're saying something succinct and something important and something relevant, than to just put up paintings on the wall for the sake of ticking a box. It's almost a year since South Africa went under lockdown, and South Africa had one of the hardest lockdowns in the world. And so as soon as we were permitted or given the freedom to be outdoors, really found fulfillment, and I've really begun to appreciate being outdoors more. So what's given me solace is walks around the promenade, in gardens, visiting the winelands, hiking. I'm very blessed and fortunate to live in one of the most beautiful cities in the world, where we have both the ocean and the mountain and lots of greenery. So in spite of a lot of difficult circumstances, I've been able to take advantage of those things and just spend time in nature with friends, and it's given me a lot of time to think about what matters and to really try and reflect. So last year I was invited to curate an exhibition at a new space in Miami called El Espacio 23. And it was such a wonderful, interesting, unique and different opportunity because of course I couldn't travel. So it involved a lot of video calls and WhatsApp messages, but it was wonderful to have access to such a strong and important collection. So the exhibition is titled Witness, Afro Perspectives from the George Perez collection. And I titled it Witness because I was just reflecting on everything that's happened in my world, around the world, and thinking about what Miami means in the US. It's basically a selection of artists from the African continent, as in the geopolitical space, but also the African diaspora. So there are Cuban artists and African American artists involved, and they're all in some way or another talking about things that we've witnessed or continue to witness in our present moment. So what are my views on art and rebellion or art and disruption? Art can't carry a gun and go and start a revolution, but I do understand that art can inspire someone to go out and start a revolution. There are interesting curators and artists who have done some really interesting projects around the world around art and protest. Some of them were featured in Zeitz MOCCA's Radical Solidarity Summit. A big part of that was highlighting some important work that had been done around archives, around art and protests. Simone Jami, during an intensive I did a long time ago in Dakar, said something along the lines of, if all you have is your mother's kitchen, then curate a show in it. Now, I'm not quoting him word for word, but that's pretty much what I took away from him. I think having grown up in Zimbabwe and even working in South Africa, like, I'm surrounded by artists and curators who have made big things out of very little resources. A few of my friends and I kind of joke around and say, you know, we always tell each other, don't wait for a David Livingstone moment, like someone from outside to come and discover you. No, use your mother's kitchen, use whatever you have. That'll take you far, and you'll see that each opportunity just keeps opening more opportunities. You find interesting people, you find like-minded people, you collaborate. What I've learned from the people I've worked with or seen or looked up to is you have to keep the door open for the next person, especially people coming from spaces where they normally wouldn't have those opportunities. And be generous. If you have information, don't keep it to yourself. Just be generous. I really believe, like, the more you give, the more you get.
I was recently invited to be part of the curatorial team for the Bamako Biennale. It's the 13th edition. And it's an incredible opportunity because I get to work with people I've looked up to for a very, very long time. So the artistic director is Bonaventure Dikung. It's such an honor to be part of his curatorial team, and I get to be part of a really important biennial that has been running since 1994 on the continent.
Thinking about value and art, I'm more interested in knowledge production and knowledge sharing and exchange and collaboration. When there's knowledge sharing and when people are given space and platforms from which they can project their ideas in interesting ways, you know, you can't measure that impact, and it can influence generations. It can influence the way you see yourself, the way society sees itself, the way you project yourself, the way you dream, the way you imagine. And I think for me, that's where the true value of art lies. The fact that within art, you can reflect on the meaning, on existential issues. You can document an underrepresented history. You can archive, you can call to question, you can provoke, you can ignite, you can become a catalyst. And for me, that's where the true value of art is. What happens afterwards within the art market, that's not for me to say.